The chipped porcelain felt cold against his lower lip. Julian Devereux, wine critic for The New Yorker, brought the Blackwood Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon to his nose. Blackwood. The name resonated with a weight that had less to do with the wine's pedigree and more with the family's reputation. They were old money, old power, and fiercely protective of both. He inhaled blackcurrant, cedar. A suggestion of vanilla, the oak aging having done its work. The aromas were sundi present and accounted for. But when the wine touched his tongue, nothing, not nothing, exactly. A muted echo of flavor. A phantom sensation where a rich, complex taste should have exploded. It was like viewing a masterpiece through frosted glass. He swirled the dark ruby liquid, the sunlight from the vineyard windows catching in its depths. He tasted again, still diminished. Well, Julian, Alistair Blackwood's voice, gravelly and imbued with expectation, cut through the quiet of the tasting room. He was a man built like an old oak himself, broad, unyielding, with a face etched with the lines of decades spent weathering storms. He stood beside his daughter, Vivienne, who offered a polite, expectant smile. Julian forced a swallow, his expression carefully neutral. A fascinating vintage, Mr. Blackwood. The nose is classic Blackwood. All the hallmarks are present. He paused, choosing his words with meticulous care. Years of navigating delicate palates, and even more delicate egos had honed his diplomatic skills. The palate, however, it is restrained. Alistair's eyebrows, thick and gray, drew together. Subtle, Vivienne offered quickly, her fingers tightening around the stem of her own glass. She was striking, a younger, sharper version of her father, with a gaze that assessed everything, missed nothing. She wanted something. Julian hadn't yet figured out what, perhaps a wine that will benefit from further aging. "It is ready now," Alistair stated flatly. "It should be ready now." Julian took another sip, concentrating. He needed to be precise. His reputation rested on the accuracy of his assessments. The last thing he needed was to be deemed unreliable. Especially now, he'd noticed it subtly at first, tired off flatness to certain wines, a lack of nuance. He'd chalked it up to fatigue, stress. But the problem was worsening. Over the last few weeks, flavors were becoming elusive. This time, though, beneath the muted fruit and oak, he detected something else. A faint, almost imperceptible metallic tang, like blood, he frowned. Tasting again, it was there. A whisper of iron that shouldn't be. He dismissed it. Impossible. It had to be his imagination, a phantom sensation brought on by whatever was happening to his palate. "It is a beautiful wine, Mr. Blackwood," Julian said, forcing a genuine tone. "Truly, a testament to the terroir and your winemaking expertise." Alistair didn't look convinced. "You're not effusive, Julian. I expected more. I believe in honest evaluation, sir, and this is an honest observation. It is a complex wine. It doesn't shout for attention." Vivienne's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Perhaps your palate is tired from your travels." "Perhaps," Julian conceded. He'd been crisscrossing Europe for the past month, evaluating vintages in Bordeaux, Tuscany, the Rioja region. But that didn't explain this. Thinning. "My brother Grayson, he has a more discerning palate," Vivienne said, turning slightly towards the large French doors that led to the terrace. "He is somewhat of a recluse, but he is intimately involved in the process. He might offer a different perspective." "Grayson," Alistair's jaw tightened. He glanced at his daughter, then back at Julian. "He is preoccupied. He is always preoccupied." Vivienne retorted, her voice laced with a familiar edge. "But this is important. It is important ard wine." Alistair sighed, rubbing a hand over his forehead. "Very well. I'll see if he is amenable, though I doubt it." He clapped his hands. "David, find Mr. Blackwood. Tell him we have a visitor." A moment of silence descended as Alistair's request was carried out. The tasting room, filled with dark wood and antique furniture, felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with unspoken tensions. Julian observed the interplay between father and daughter. There was ambition in Vivienne's eyes, a desire to prove herself, and resentment directed at her brother. He'd met the Blackwoods once before, years ago, during his early days as sommelier. He'd been working at a Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco, and Grayson Blackwood had been a frequent patron. Grayson, then a handsome, brooding young man with a similar intensity to his sister, but channeled into a detached cynicism. They'd bonded over a shared love of obscure Burgundies and a thinly veiled contempt for the superficiality of the wine world. He remembered intense conversations fueled by expensive wine and shared dissatisfaction. He also remembered a competitive edge. Grayson had been subtly, relentlessly testing him, questioning his knowledge, probing for weaknesses. Julian had risen to the challenge, enjoying the intellectual sparring. But it hadn't lasted. Grayson had abruptly cut off contact, vanishing back into the Blackwood estate, leaving Julian to wonder what had provoked the silence. Staring into the ruby depths of the Blackwood Reserve, that old rivalry stirred. He recalled Grayson's meticulous attention to detail, his almost obsessive understanding of every aspect of the winemaking process. If anyone would detect a flaw in this wine, it would be him, David, a gaunt man with wary eyes. Returned, Mr. Blackwood will see you. Eventually, he is in the cellar. Excellent, Vivienne said, perhaps a little too eagerly. We'll join you both shortly, Julian. Alistair nodded curtly. David, see to it that Mr. Devereux has another glass. Julian allowed David to pour him another serving of the Blackwood Reserve. He watched as the wine filled the glass, the light illuminating its color. He brought it to his nose again, seeking that initial burst of aroma, still muted. He took a slow, deliberate sip, concentrating solely on the taste. The metallic tang was stronger now. It wasn't a prominent flavor, not yet, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface, a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious composition. He swirled the wine in his glass, creating a vortex of color. He focused on the legs, the way the wine clung to the side of the glass. Were they off? Slower than they should be? He remembered a lecture from his mentor, Professor Dubois, years ago at Le Cordon Bleu. Professor Dubois, a formidable woman with a palate legendary in the industry, had warned him about the subtle signs of adulteration, metallic tastes, sluggish legs, a lingering bitterness, all indicators that something was amiss. He dismissed those lessons as academic exercises, cautionary tales for naive students. He'd never encountered anything like it in his professional life. Until now, he reached for the carafe of water, cleansing his palate. Then he tasted the wine again. The metallic tang remained. He sat there, a knot tightening in his stomach. Could it be, was someone deliberately sabotaging the wine? Or was his failing sense of taste playing tricks on him, distorting the flavors, creating phantom sensations? He needed to be sure. He discreetly signaled David for a pen and paper. I'd like to make a few notes, he said, hoping his voice sounded casual. David, ever watchful, obliged. Julian scribbled a quick note, a list of the flavors he was experiencing, or not to experiencing. He described the muted fruit, the lack of complexity, the unsettling metallic tang. As he wrote, he realized how much was riding on this. His reputation, his career, everything he'd worked for. If he published a scathing review of the Blackwood Reserve, accusing them of tampering with their wine, he'd be opening a war with a family that didn't take criticism lightly. But if he ignored his instincts, if he allowed his deteriorating palate to cloud his judgment, he'd be compromising his integrity. And he couldn't do that, not after all these years. He finished his notes, folding the paper into a tight square and slipping it into his pocket. He took one final sip of the wine, steeling himself. This wasn't just a matter of taste anymore. It was a matter of truth. He slowly raised the glass to his lips, bringing the wine to his nose. He inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and focused all his remaining senses on the liquid in his hand. And then he knew the wine was poisoned, or at least something had been added to it that shouldn't be there. Something subtle, insidious, designed to alter its flavor, to mask its true character. But was it the wine, or was it him? His heart hammered against his ribs. He tasted again, desperately trying to rationalize what he was experiencing. To blame his failing senses, to find a logical explanation that didn't involve malice, deception, and a deliberate act of sabotage. But the metallic tang persisted, a cold, unwelcome presence on his tongue. He looked towards the French doors, where Vivienne Blackwood still stood, watching him, her expression unreadable. She knew something. He could feel it. Could she sense his suspicion, or was she simply observing his reaction, gauging how much damage had already been done? He needed to understand what was happening, and he needed to understand it now. He set the glass down on the table, the crystal clinking softly against the polished wood. He took a deep breath, trying to appear calm, composed. He was Julian Devereux, wine critic. He wasn't afraid of anything. But as he looked into the dark depths of the Blackwood Reserve, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, and he wasn't sure if his failing palate was leading him towards the truth or driving him further into a dangerous delusion. The library at Blackwood Manor smelled of dust and decaying leather. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the heavy velvet curtains, casting the room in a perpetual twilight. Julian ran a finger along the spines of ancient tomes, pretending to browse while surreptitiously searching for anything pertaining to local flora and fauna. Specifically, those with metallic properties. Alistair, occupied with a phone call he was conducting in hushed, urgent tones, hadn't he bothered to assign a guide. Vivienne, thankfully, was nowhere in sight. He managed to excuse himself from a prolonged tasting with Alistair by claiming a sudden headache, a convenient ailment that explained his muted responses. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He needed information, and he needed it quickly. The metallic tang hadn't dissipated, if anything. It become more pronounced during the light lunch they shared. He found a section dedicated to regional botany and began pulling volumes, his increasing anxiety mirroring the growing disorder on the table. He wasn't a chemist or a toxicologist, but he knew enough to recognize that whatever had tainted the wine wasn't a common poison. Cyanide would have been obvious. So would arsenic. This was finer, deliberate. He found a slim volume detailing the region's mineral deposits. Iron pyrite, or fool, gold, was common in the soil. Could that be it? A trace element leaching into the grapes? Unlikely. The concentration would have to be astronomical to produce a detectable taste. He needed something organic, something someone could identify purposefully. He stumbled upon a description of 20 Atropa belladonna, or deadly nightshade, detailing its historical use in winemaking 40, not to poison, but to subtly alter flavor profiles. The extract contained a metallic undertone, and crucially, it grew wild in the surrounding hills, locally sourced. Then that narrowed the possibilities considerably. But who knew enough about both winemaking and poisonous plants to attempt such a thing? He replaced the books, his movements stiff with tension. He couldn't stay here much longer. The silence was oppressive, and he felt increasingly exposed later. Under the guise of exploring the vineyard, Julian sought out Matteo, one of the older workers. Matteo had been at Blackwood for decades, his hands gnarled and stained by years of pruning and harvesting. He was a man of few words, but Julian hoped to glean something from his taciturn observations. "Beautiful vines, Matteo," Julian said, forcing a casual tone. "A magnificent operation." Matteo grunted in response, continuing to tie up a sprawling vine. "I was just admiring the diversity of plants. I noticed some nightshade growing on the northern slope." Matteo's hand stilled. He turned slowly, his dark eyes scrutinizing Julian. "You know about the belladonna?" "Just a passing observation. It is unusual to find it growing so close to the vineyards. It stays away mostly. Sir Blackwood keeps it trimmed." Matteo's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Sir Blackwood does?" Julian pressed, careful not to sound accusatory. "Or to someone else?" Matteo's jaw tightened. He looked past Julian towards the distant manor house. "That is not for me to say. Of course I understand." Julian paused, then ventured. "I noticed the wine. It was a little subtle, perhaps. Not quite the robust flavor I was expecting." Matteo's gaze snapped back to Julian, hard and assessing. "You think something's wrong with the wine?" "I didn't say that. I just wondered." Matteo snorted. "You are a critic. You are supposed to wonder." He turned back to his work, effectively ending the conversation. Julian thanked him and moved on, feeling a prickle of unease. Everyone was guarded. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. They knew something, or they suspected he did. The memory surfaced unbidden, a phantom limb of a past life. The San Francisco Wine Competition 2008. He was a rising star, a young sommelier with a preternatural palate. Grayson Blackwood, the rebellious heir to the Blackwood dynasty, was an equally promising amateur. fueled by his family's resources and a burning need to prove himself. And then there was Isabelle Dubois, the competition judge, a renowned winemaker in her own right. Beautiful, brilliant, and completely oblivious to the simmering rivalry between Julian and Grayson. Both men were hopelessly, silently in love with her. The competition hinged on a blind tasting. Each contestant had to identify the vintage, the vineyard, and the subtle nuances of flavor in a selection of California wines. Julian had breezed through the first few rounds, his palate flawlessly discerning each note. But then came the final wine, Sauvignon, rare Cabernet Sauvignon, aged for decades. He de-identified it instantly, Senia Blackwood Reserve, but he de-hesitated. Second, guessing himself. For a fleeting moment, he de-allowed Grayson, dismissive smirk to cloud his judgment. He de-offered a slightly flawed assessment, and Grayson had capitalized on it, delivering a masterful analysis that secured him the victory. The award hadn't just been a win for Grayson. It had been a blow to Julian's pride. Isabelle had congratulated Grayson with an effusive warmth that felt like a deliberate rejection. Julian had stormed out, fueled by humiliation and a gnawing suspicion that Grayson had somehow known what wine was being presented. He'd seen a flicker of knowing amusement in Grayson. SICivity, a confirmation of his suspicions. The rivalry had festered for months after that, a silent war of glares and thinly veiled insults. Then, abruptly, Grayson had disappeared from the San Francisco wine scene, retreating back to the Blackwood estate, leaving Julian to wonder what had triggered his sudden withdrawal. By evening, Julian's condition had worsened. The metallic tang hadn't faded, it had intensified, spreading to the back of his throat. He tried a glass of water, then a piece of fruit. But nothing could mask the insidious taste. Colors seemed less vibrant, sounds more muffled. He felt disconnected. He called his doctor in New York, describing his symptoms with carefully chosen words, omitting the wine and the potential poisoning. He couldn't risk alarming anyone, at least not yet. His doctor recommended rest and suggested he see a neurologist upon his return. But Julian knew that wasn't enough. He needed a specialist, someone who understood the intricacies of the palate, someone who could diagnose what was happening to him. He remembered a name, suing Dr. Eleanor Vance, a neurogastroenterologist at a private clinic in Boston, renowned for her work on taste and smell disorders. It was a long shot, but he was desperate. He booked a flight for the following morning, making excuses to Alistair about an urgent family matter. Alistair barely seemed to notice, preoccupied with some unseen crisis. The next morning, the Blackwood Library once again provided a temporary sanctuary. Julian, waiting for his car to arrive, was on a video call with Dr. Vance. "So, you are experiencing a progressive loss of taste acuity, Dr. Vance?" Voice was calm and professional, her face projected on his laptop screen. "Yes," it started subtly, with a general flattening of flavors. "Now, it is like everything is muted, and this metallic taste, it is constant." Dr. Vance listened intently, her expression unreadable. "Have you experienced any other symptoms, numbness, tingling, difficulty with smell?" "Numbered, just the taste, and a growing sense of disconnection, I see." She paused, then said, "I've seen similar cases. It is rare, but not unheard of. It is likely a neurological condition affecting the gustatory cortex, specifically a form of cortical dysplasia. It is often hereditary, but can also be triggered by environmental factors, toxins, viral infections, even extreme stress." Julian's blood ran cold. Cortical dysplasia, a degenerative neurological condition, a slow erosion of his most prized possession, his palate. What does that mean?" he stammered. "It means your brain is essentially rewiring itself, altering the way it processes taste information. Unfortunately, it is a progressive condition. There is no cure, but we can manage the symptoms." "Manage? What does that involve?" "Medication to alleviate some of the discomfort, therapy to help you adapt. But the most important thing is to minimize stress. Stress will accelerate the decline." Julian stared at the screen, numb with shock. Stress, that was impossible. He thrived on pressure, he needed ID. Is there anything I can do? Early intervention is crucial. The sooner we start treatment, the slower the progression. I'd like you to come to Boston as soon as possible for a full series of tests, he agreed. His mind reeling, he felt like a ship foundering in a storm. His compass broken, his destination lost. Later that day, after Dr. Vance's chilling diagnosis, a package arrived at his room. It was a small, unmarked box, delivered by a silent, scowling David inside. Nestled in a bed of packing peanuts was a single sprig of deadly nightshade. Attached was a small, handwritten note, asterisk a reminder of what grows wild. Julian's heart pounded. The note wasn't T-signed, but he knew, with chilling certainty, who had sent it. He carefully examined the nightshade, noting the dark, glossy leaves and the small, purplish berries. He remembered Mateo's words, "Finder say, or Blackwood keeps it trimmed." But who had provided the shears? Who understood not only the plant's poisonous properties, but also its subtle impact on wine flavor? He closed his eyes, picturing Grayson Blackwood, his face etched with that familiar look of cold calculation. And then a disturbing thought occurred to him. The nightshade wasn't just a threat, it was a message. Someone wasn't just trying to poison his wine. They were trying to poison wine and they clearly knew more about his condition than he did. Morning mist clung to the Blackwood vineyard like a shroud, obscuring the rows of vines in a ghostly haze. Julian, feigning a mild illness to avoid Alistair, increasingly pointed questions, used the excuse to wander the grounds, ostensibly for fresh air, but his true purpose was observation. He needed to understand the vineyard's operations, identify who had access to the wine, and uncover any hidden resentments. He started with the cellar, the heart of the Blackwood Empire. It was a vast, labyrinthine space carved into the hillside. Cool and damp, the air thick with the scent of oak and fermentation. He lingered near the loading dock, watching as workers transported cases of wine to a waiting truck. Mateo was there, supervising, his expression as impassive as ever. So was Leo, a young, muscular man with a quick temper and a habit of glaring at anyone who made eye contact. Leo had been vocal about his dissatisfaction with the low wages, according to the snippets of conversation Julian had overheard. Then there was Isabel Rossi, the head winemaker, a recent hire who had replaced the long-serving Jean-Pierre Dubois, no relation to Julian's mentor. Under mysterious circumstances, she moved with an unnerving efficiency, her face pale and strained. Julian had tried to engage her in conversation yesterday, but she had offered only curt, technical answers, avoiding eye contact. He watched as Leo and another worker, Ricardo, wrestled with a particularly heavy palate. Ricardo stumbled, nearly dropping a case. Leo's reaction was immediate torrent of Spanish invective followed by a shove that sent Ricardo reeling. Julian noticed Mateo intervene, separating the two men with a stern reprimand. But the incident had revealed a clear power dynamic, and simmering animosity later, with a carefully constructed apology for his indisposition, Julian requested access to the vineyard's inventory records. Alistair, still preoccupied, reluctantly agreed, directing David to provide the information. The records were kept in a small, cluttered office adjoining the cellar. David, hovering nervously, watched as Julian scanned the spreadsheets. The initial numbers seemed to check out. Production yields, sales figures, and stock levels all appeared consistent. But as he delved deeper, he noticed something odd. Discrepancies in the records for the Blackwood Reserve. Small discrepancies at first, a few cases unaccounted for. Then, larger ones over the past 6 months. Nearly 50 cases of the 2018 vintage 3030. The very vintage he tasted, 30 were listed as lost or damaged. And the explanations were vague: cellar damage, shipping error, accounting mistake. None of them felt credible. It was as if someone was deliberately covering up a larger problem. Julian made a silent note to investigate further. The confrontation with Vivienne came later that afternoon. As Julian was sketching the vineyard from the terrace, admiring the view, Mr. Devereux, her voice was laced with a thinly veiled hostility. He looked up, meeting her icy gaze. It is a beautiful estate, Miss Blackwood. Remarkable. Remarkable enough to risk ruining with a fabricated scandal. She strode towards him, her heels clicking on the stone tiles. I am not sure what you mean. Julian feigned innocence, though his heart was pounding. Don't play coy with me. I've heard about your questions you're poking around. Accusations of altered wine, suspicious ingredients. It is outrageous. I simply expressed a concern about the subtlety of the flavor profile, and I inquired about the nightshade growing on the property. Vivienne's lips curled into a sneer. You are trying to undermine us, aren't you? To discredit the Blackwood name, you always resented my brother's victory at that competition years ago. Didn't you? This is just a continuation of that petty rivalry. That is not true. My concerns are solely professional. Professional or personal? You've always been obsessed with the Blackwoods, captivated by our dynasty. Now you are trying to tear it down. I assure you, I have no such intentions. I don't believe you. You are here to do damage, and you are using this illness of yours as a convenient excuse. Perhaps your palate isn't failing, Mr. Devereux. Perhaps you are simply blinded by your own prejudices. She turned to leave, then paused, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Be careful, Mr. Devereux. Don't dig too deep. You might not like what you find. The financial troubles came to light unexpectedly during a casual conversation with old man Hemlock. The groundskeeper, Hemlock, a wiry man with eyes that had seen too much, had been tending the rose garden. He spoke in cryptic riddles, but Julian managed to piece together a disturbing picture. The vineyard, it is not doing well, Hemlock said, clipping a withered rose. Times are hard. The market's changing. People want cheap wine, not tradition. I wasn't aware, Julian said, carefully steering the conversation. Alistair, he has been borrowing money. A lot of money from some unsavory characters. Hemlock glanced around nervously. As if afraid of being overheard, they not patient men. They want their money back. Julian pressed him for details, but Hemlock clammed up, muttering about keeping his nose clean. However, the seed of suspicion had been planted. Financial desperation, a possible motive for tampering with the wine sooty to drive up demand, create scarcity, or even collect insurance money. Later that evening, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread, Julian returned to the cellar. He told himself he was simply reviewing the inventory records again, confirming his suspicions, but he knew he was looking for something more. He wanted to understand the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. David wasn't on duty tonight, a rare occurrence. The cellar was eerily silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigeration units. Julian systematically searched the cellar, examining the rows of oak barrels and stainless steel tanks. He checked the storage areas, the tasting rooms, the shipping bays. Nothing seemed out of place then. While investigating a dimly lit corner behind a stack of empty crates, he noticed something odd. A section of the stone wall appeared different. The stones were uneven, awkwardly fitted together, as if they had been added later. He ran his hand along the wall, searching for a seam, a crack, any indication of a hidden opening. And then he found it to a barely perceptible indentation, concealed by a thick layer of dust. He pressed against the stone, and with a grinding groan, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden room. The room was small and musty, lit only by the faint glow of a single bare bulb. It was filled with shelves, stacked high with dusty, unlabeled wine bottles. Bottles of all shapes and sizes, some ancient and cobwebbed, others relatively new. Julian cautiously stepped inside, his heart hammering in his chest. He ran his finger along a bottle, wiping away the dust. The label was missing, but he recognized the shape Thenier Blackwood Reserve from the 1980s. Then, his gaze fell upon something else, lying on a small wooden table in the center of the room. It was a hypodermic needle used, and on the tip, a faint, glistening residue. The same metallic residue he tasted in the wine. The air in the hidden cellar was thick with the scent of decay and something acrid. Chemical. Julian's flashlight beam danced across the rows of unlabeled bottles, each one a silent testament to a clandestine operation. He carefully selected one at random, holding it up to the light. The glass was thick, antique, and sealed with a cracked wax cap. He strained to see through the grime, but the liquid inside was opaque, almost black. He found a corkscrew tucked into a corner and carefully extracted the cork. A puff of stale air escaped, carrying a faint, metallic odor semi-identical to the one he detected in the Blackwood Reserve. He hesitated. He knew he shouldn't taste it, but he needed to be certain. He dabbed a minuscule amount onto his fingertip. Bracing himself, the taste exploded on his tongue. Sunia, bitter, coppery tang, instantly familiar and deeply unsettling. It wasn't just the metallic taste. It was a complex, layered flavor hinting at something. Engineered, he spat it out immediately, rinsing his mouth with the small flask of water he always carried. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, followed by a tingling sensation in his extremities. He quickly retreated from the room, shaking his head, a cold dread settling in his stomach. This wasn't just tampering, this was alchemy. He examined a dozen more bottles, each containing a different variation of the dark, ominous liquid. Using a small UV light he'd salvaged from his camera bag, he scanned the inside of the bottles, revealing faint fluorescent traces along the glass. He'd seen something similar in crime documentaries, when residue, from a specific type of synthesized compound. The same compound he suspected was causing his deteriorating palate. He needed to understand what he was dealing with, and he needed to understand it quickly. The turning point came when he remembered something Vivienne had mentioned during their first meeting. 40 Alistair, Blackwood's unexpected shift in career path. Before dedicating his life to winemaking, Alistair had been a brilliant chemist, a rising star in the pharmaceutical industry. He'd abandoned it all, seemingly overnight, to inherit the family vineyard. A convenient story fueled by whispers of a failed research project and a personal tragedy. Julian returned to the library, ignoring the icy glares from Vivienne, who was pointedly arranging flowers in a vase. He searched for any documentation relating to Alistair's past, and after hours of meticulous digging, he found a timid, forgotten archive of old family records, tucked away in a dusty mahogany cabinet. Among the faded letters and yellowed photographs, he discovered a small leather-bound ledger. The handwriting was Alistair's, neat and precise, detailing a series of experiments conducted in the years leading up to his career change. The experiments involved the extraction and synthesis of compounds from various plants, including, prominently, Heteropa belladonna. He scanned through the entries, his blood running cold. Alistair wasn't just experimenting with plant extracts. He was attempting to isolate and enhance their psychoactive properties. He was obsessed with altering perception, with creating a perfect experience. The ledger contained diagrams, chemical formulas, and meticulous notes on the effects of various compounds on the human brain. And then he found the name Jean-Luc Moreau, Alistair's former colleague, a brilliant but eccentric winemaker from a neighboring estate. The ledger detailed a bitter rivalry between the two men, a clash of egos and competing research philosophies. Moreau had accused Alistair of stealing his ideas, of endangering lives with his reckless experiments. The last entry regarding Moreau was dated just months before Alistair abruptly abandoned his scientific career and took over the Blackwood vineyard. Alistair hadn't simply left the world of chemistry, he'd fled it. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Alistair's scientific background, the hidden cellar, the experimental wine blends, the poisoned Blackwood Reserve, the targeted attacks on Julian's palate. It all pointed to a pattern of obsession, deception, and a dangerous disregard for human life. He felt a sudden urge to re-examine the vineyard's layout, to uncover any connection between Alistair's hidden laboratory and the wine production process. As he walked towards the fermentation tanks, he noticed a small, unattended glass near a drainage pipe, a glass filled with a dark, viscous liquid. He cautiously approached, his senses on high alert. He remembered Dr. Vance's warning stress would accelerate his condition. But he couldn't afford to be cautious. He needed to know. He reached for the glass, intending to analyze the liquid. But then, a wave of dizziness washed over him, and he stumbled, his hand brushing against the rim of the glass. A tiny splash of the liquid landed on his lip. He recoiled, instinctively spitting it out, his heart pounding. The taste was overwhelmingly metallic, even more potent than the sample he'd taken from the bottles in the cellar. He felt a burning sensation in his throat, a numbness spreading through his fingers and toes. He barely managed to steady himself, leaning against a nearby tank for support. He realized he'd just made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated the danger. He'd allowed his curiosity to override his caution. He staggered back towards the manor. Desperately seeking water, seeking relief, he encountered Vivienne on the terrace, her face pale with alarm. "Mr. Devereux, are you all right, you look?" Ignored her, rushing past her towards the kitchen as he reached for a glass of water. He heard a commotion erupting from the vineyard. Shouts, screams, the sound of frantic activity. He stumbled outside, following the sound of the chaos. He found a crowd gathered near the center of the vines, surrounding a prone figure, Alistair Blackwood. He pushed his way through the throng. His heart sinking, Alistair lay motionless on the ground, his face contorted in pain, his lips tinged with a faint bluish hue. Someone was yelling for a doctor, but it was clear. Alistair wasn't breathing. A half-empty glass lay shattered beside him, a glass containing the same dark, viscous liquid Julian had nearly ingested. Alistair Blackwood, the master winemaker, the secretive chemist, had been poisoned, with his own poison. The first responders' assessment was grim. Alistair Blackwood was beyond saving. The local sheriff, a stout man named Brodie, arrived shortly after. His face grim. The scene was quickly secured. The vineyard workers corralled, and a preliminary investigation launched. Suspicion immediately fell on Vivienne. Alistair's death elevated her to the sole heir of the Blackwood estate, giving her complete control over the family's fortune and legacy. She possessed the ambition, the ruthlessness, and the opportunity. Julian watched her from the periphery. Observing her carefully rehearsed display of grief, it felt hollow, too controlled. She answered Brodie's questions with a chilling composure, offering a flawlessly constructed narrative of shock and disbelief. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a role. "It is unfathomable," she told Brodie, her voice trembling slightly. "My father was a strong man, a vital man. Who would do such a thing?" Julian approached her, his gaze unwavering. "You seem remarkably composed, Miss Blackwood." She turned, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Composed? My father is dead." "Mr. Devereux, what would you have me do? Wail and tear my hair? Perhaps. But your grief seems distant. That is outrageous. You're insinuating something." "I'm simply observing. You stood to gain the most from your father's death." Vivienne's features hardened. "How dare you? You've been sniffing around since you arrived, trying to discredit my family, to ruin our reputation. Now you're accusing me of murder. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking questions. Don't bother. You won't find anything. The real culprit is far closer than you think." She paused, a flicker of something akin to triumph in her eyes. "Look at Grayson." Grayson Blackwood had been a shadow throughout the entire ordeal, lurking on the periphery, his face a mask of brooding silence. He'd returned to the vineyard only a month ago, after years of self-imposed exile, seemingly intent on mending fences with his father. But the relationship, according to Vivienne, had been fraught with tension. "He has always been the troubled one," Vivienne said, her voice low and venomous. "A black sheep. He resented my father's success, his legacy. He felt overshadowed." "Did he have a motive?" Julian asked. "Money? He has always been reckless with money. He has gambled away fortunes, accumulated debts. My father refused to bail him out any longer. He cut him off completely." Julian remembered their shared history, the intellectual sparring, the underlying competition. He dismissed Grayson as a petulant rebel, but now he wondered if there was more to the story. He'd seen the darkness in Grayson's eyes, the simmering resentment beneath the surface. He recalled a wine competition in Napa Valley, years before his encounter with the Blackwoods. Determined to prove himself, had entered a bottle under an assumed name. Julian, as a judge, had instantly recognized the wine's subtle brilliance, a unique blend that betrayed his family's techniques. He'd given it a glowing review, unknowingly praising the work of his rival. But the win had been short-lived. Alistair Blackwood, enraged by his son's deception, had publicly humiliated Grayson, denouncing his actions as a betrayal. The incident had left Grayson scarred, fueling his already volatile temperament. He'd vanished shortly after, disappearing from the wine world entirely. The humiliation seemed a potent enough motive. Julian found Grayson in the cellar, staring at the rows of wine barrels as if searching for answers. He was a gaunt figure, his eyes sunken, his clothes rumpled. He looked defeated. Grayson, Julian said, his voice firm. I need to ask you some questions. Grayson didn't turn. I assumed you would. Your sister believes you were responsible for your father's death. He finally turned, his gaze locking with Julian's. Vivienne, always the manipulator, always quick to point the finger. Did you do it? Grayson let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Do you really think I would kill my own father? You resented him. You needed money. He cut you off. Resentment is a luxury I can't afford. And money is a fleeting illusion. You were desperate. Desperate enough to poison my father, no. I was desperate to earn his respect, something he never gave me. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. He never understood me. He wanted me to be a carbon copy of himself, a businessman, a vintner. I wanted to be something more. What did you want? Grayson's eyes gleamed with a feverish intensity. I wanted to create, to innovate, to push the boundaries of what is possible. He glanced around the cellar, his gaze lingering on the hidden room Julian had discovered. He stifled my creativity. He dismissed my ideas. He called me a failure. The argument escalated quickly. Julian pressed Grayson for details, challenging his alibi, pointing out inconsistencies in his story. Grayson responded with increasing aggression, his voice rising to a shout. You've always looked down on me, haven't you? Just because you had the good fortune to be born with a refined palate, you think you're better than me, more intelligent, more discerning. I'm not judging you, Grayson. I'm trying to uncover the truth. The truth you wouldn't recognize the truth if it slapped you in the face. He lunged at Julian, his hands clenched into fists. Julian, caught off guard, stumbled backward, barely managing to avoid the blow. He instinctively raised his arms in defense, blocking Grayson's wild swings. Grayson, stop. This isn't going to solve anything. But Grayson was beyond reason. He was a whirlwind of rage, fueled by years of pent-up frustration and grief. He swung again, connecting with Julian's jaw, sending him reeling. Julian retaliated, landing a glancing blow on Grayson's cheek. The two men grappled, wrestling amongst the rows of wine barrels, knocking over crates and scattering bottles. The air filled with the scent of oak and spilled wine. During the struggle, Julian's hand brushed against Grayson's coat. He felt something hard and cylindrical hidden inside the pocket. He instinctively reached for it, breaking free of Grayson's grip. He pulled out a small glass vial, sealed with a rubber stopper inside. A dark, viscous liquid swirled, shimmering in the dim light. It was the same metallic liquid he'd found in the cellar, the same liquid that had poisoned Alistair Blackwood. Grayson's face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. Give it back, he screamed, lunging for the vial. I think I've found what I was looking for, Julian said, holding the vial out of reach. A little souvenir. The sheriff and his deputies arrived, drawn by the commotion. They quickly separated Julian and Grayson, handcuffing the latter and leading him away. Vivienne watched the scene unfold, her face unreadable. She hadn't offered to help Grayson, hadn't even attempted to intervene. As Grayson was being led away, he caught Julian's eye. His gaze was filled with a chilling mixture of defeat and defiance. You don't understand, he whispered. You don't understand any of it. The interrogation room was sterile, cold, illuminated by a single harsh fluorescent light. Grayson, his face bruised and swollen, sat opposite Julian, his gaze fixed on the chipped Formica tabletop. He hadn't requested a lawyer, seemingly resigned to his fate. So you admit to supplying the poison? Julian asked, his voice carefully neutral. Grayson nodded slowly. Yes, but I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to hurt him, to expose him, to show everyone what he really was. He explained his plan with a quiet desperation. He discovered his father's past experiments, the reckless disregard for safety, the obsession with altering perception. He'd seen the old ledgers, read the damning entries. He'd been horrified, disgusted. I wanted to ruin the Blackwood Reserve, to discredit his life's work, Grayson said, his voice barely a whisper. I found the nightshade growing on the property, researched the extracts. I thought it would just affect the taste, make the wine undrinkable, a scandal, a public humiliation. He'd contacted a supplier, a shady contact from his gambling days, requesting a mild toxin. He hadn't specified the dosage, hadn't understood the potential consequences. He thought he was just ordering a harmless substance to taint a few bottles of wine. He delivered the vials to the cellar, leaving them for his father to discover. The plan was to let Alistair take the blame, to expose his dangerous experiments, and finally gain his respect, or at least his acknowledgement. "I never intended for anyone to get hurt," he insisted, his eyes brimming with remorse. "I swear." Julian listened patiently, but something didn't add up. Grayson's plan was convoluted, reckless, but it didn't explain the sheer lethality of the poison. It didn't explain Alistair's precise fatal dose. It didn't explain the escalating series of accidents with the wine samples. "You said you didn't want to kill your father," Julian said, fixing Grayson with a steady gaze. "But the amount of toxin found in the wine, it was far beyond what you described. It was a purposeful dose, enough to ensure his death." Grayson's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Grayson. I found the vial in your coat pocket. You were carrying it." He hesitated for a moment, then crumbled. "It wasn't me, at first. It was Vivienne." Julian felt a cold dread creep into his bones. Vivienne. It had been obvious all along. "She found out about what I'd done," Grayson continued. "She saw it as an opportunity. She said I was weak, foolish, that I'd wasted a chance to finally be rid of father. She took control." He explained how Vivienne had manipulated him, subtly increasing the potency of the toxin, adding additional compounds to the mixture, and ensuring that the poison wine was served directly to Alistair. "She told me it was just a way to make the scandal more severe, to really damage his reputation." Grayson said, his voice choked with emotion. "She said it would all be over quickly, that father would just be humiliated. I believed her. I trusted her. He'd been a pawn in her game, a willing accomplice in her ruthless ambition. Vivienne, the astute, calculating heiress, had orchestrated the entire tragedy, using her brother's resentment and desperation to achieve her ultimate goal: control of the Blackwood estate. The sheriff's deputies arrived to take Vivienne into custody. She didn't resist, her expression glacial, her eyes devoid of emotion. As she was being led away, she turned to Julian, a chilling smile playing on her lips. "You may have solved the mystery, Mr. Devereux," she said, her voice low and menacing, "but you haven't won. This family is built on secrets, and some secrets are better left buried." Julian watched her go, a profound sense of disillusionment washing over him. He'd uncovered the truth, but it was a bitter, ugly truth. The Blackwood legacy wasn't one of tradition and excellence. It was one of betrayal, ambition, and ruthless power. He sat in silence for a moment, processing the events of the past few days. He'd risked his career, his health, to expose the truth. He'd stared into the abyss and found nothing but darkness. Then a strange sensation washed over him. He focused on the taste of the stale coffee he'd been nursing, the lingering bitterness on his tongue. He closed his eyes and concentrated, and for a single fleeting moment, he tasted it. The nuanced aroma of the coffee beans, the subtle notes of chocolate and caramel, a flicker of clarity, a fleeting resurgence of his lost palate. He opened his eyes, startled. He took another sip of the coffee, savoring the flavor. But the sensation was fading, dissolving into the familiar flatness. The vibrant taste receded, leaving behind only a muted echo. He tried again, focusing all his energy on his sense of taste. But it was gone. The brief moment of clarity vanished, leaving him with a chilling realization. His condition wasn't just deteriorating, it was accelerating. Vivienne's actions had not only taken her father's life, but had also irrevocably stolen Julian's. He had gotten to the truth, but at a devastating personal cost. The sheriff approached Julian, his face grim. "We'll need a statement, Mr. Devereux. A full account of everything that has happened." Julian nodded. His mind numb, he knew he had a story to tell, a story that would shake the foundations of the Blackwood estate. But as he began to speak, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous game. And he, with his fading senses and his shattered faith, was caught in the crossfire. The news of Vivienne Blackwood's arrest reverberated through the wine world like a shockwave. The tabloids had a field day, sensationalizing the scandal, painting the Blackwood family as a dynasty consumed by greed and ambition. Grayson, though complicit, received a lighter sentence.